The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
At that time, John said to Jesus, "Teacher, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to prevent him because he does not follow us." Jesus replied, "Do not prevent him. There is no one who performs a mighty deed in my name who can at the same time speak ill of me. For whoever is not against us is for us. Anyone who gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ, amen, I say to you, will surely not lose his reward. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were put around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life maimed than with two hands to go into Gehenna, into the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life crippled than with 2 feet to be thrown into Gehenna. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Better for you to enter into the kingdom of God with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into Gehenna, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Seems like pretty much every day on the news there's some scandal, so the sins of some politician or church leader or business leader is out there for all to see. Even something as seemingly benign as airplane manufacturing or car companies have become the source of scandal recently. People taking shortcuts on manufacturing or cheating on emission standards. I heard the other day that there was an executive at Honda who was asked to either resign or be fired amid another scandal there. And after much consideration, he decided to leave of his own accord. Honda Accord? No? Okay. I hope you weren't scandalized by such a bad joke. Jesus today talks about scandal. He says, don't be actually too surprised when scandal comes. Scandal is going to come. But we live in a fallen world. We live in a sinful world, and you get money and sex and power involved. Put anyone in the public eye, there's probably going to be a scandal at some point. We have a lot going on in our hearts, and not all of it is good. But a lot of it is good. God is also working in our hearts. God's grace is involved. And not just in our hearts, but in all hearts. Today, Jesus seems to be trying to get across to us the idea that God can work anywhere. I think John, the Apostle John today is a little bit scandalized because there was this man who was trying to cast out demons in Jesus' name, and he wasn't part of the official company of apostles. And Jesus says, no, don't try to prevent him. Allow him to do it. He's doing good things. Whoever's not against us is with us. And Jesus is saying God can work everywhere. I think God is always trying to get that point across to us. In the Old Testament too, Joshua sees these 2 elders, Eldad and Medad, and they're working outside the camp. And he says, I'm going to try to prevent them. And Moses says, no, why are you jealous? Would that all people would prophesy. And sometimes we get scandalized by that idea. Even a couple of weeks ago, people seemed rather scandalized by Pope Francis's statements on his recent trip to Singapore. He was talking to a group of young people from all different religions, and he said that, God, there's good in every religion. That every religion can be a path to God. And I wasn't quite sure why we were supposed to be scandalized by those words. They seem to me like words that popes have said my whole lifetime about the beauty of interreligious dialogue, about the fact that God can work anywhere. But sometimes that's hard for us to get our minds around. The fact that God can work outside the camp doesn't mean that the camp is not important. If you're wandering in the wilderness, the camp is very important. The camp provides safety and security and food and community and worship and everything that you need for a good life. We care deeply that people belong to the camp. We care deeply that people find the beauty of our Catholic faith. That's why we evangelize so much. That's why we try to invite others into the church. I don't think anyone's saying that the Catholic Church is not important. or that all religions are equally true, or that we're indifferent as to whether or not someone's a Catholic. Because actually we believe that all salvation comes through Jesus and the church. But that doesn't mean that God can't be at work other places, planting seeds of the gospel, helping people see the path forward, and that someone can't be saved even outside the visible structure of the church, and especially if they're through no fault of their own, or they're trying to do good as best they can. It just means that they're saved by Jesus whether they ever know it or not. And sometimes, not everything has to be a scandal. I think we have to realize people have a vested interest sometimes in creating scandals. It keeps people going, it keeps the money coming in, it keeps the viewership up. And, I think maybe just this idea is just always going to be scandalous to people who want to use religion as a way of feeling superior to others. Jesus is trying to show us a different way. Jesus is trying to show us, why don't we listen to one another? Why don't we see that maybe God is at work in another person as well? Sometimes things can just be respectful disagreements. Like, I think it's perfectly fine if someone says, I kind of wish Pope Francis would emphasize more the uniqueness of Jesus in the church. We have so many voices out there, so many ideas out there in the world today. The church needs to boldly proclaim Jesus and help people see the path towards salvation. And that's a very legitimate point of view. And then there's a lot of people who feel, in our pluralistic world today, where lots of different people are coming together with different ideas, different religions, we really need to emphasize what we have in common rather than what divides us. Especially in a cosmopolitan place like Singapore, we really need to learn to live in peace with one another. And that's a very legitimate point of view. And, I think if we were able to listen to each other in charity, instead of accusing one another of heresy or something, I think we would go a long way as a church to achieving all of our goals, our goal of evangelization, our goal of peace, a goal of salvation. The truth is, God is at work everywhere. And sometimes in our world today, there's been such a breakdown in trust, maybe because of all these scandals that we see inside the church and out of it, that people have a hard time listening to another point of view. People have a hard time listening to others. There's a lack of trust in institutions, and that's a hard place we are in our world today. But not everything has to be a scandal. Some things are scandals, Jesus says. If you want to know what a scandal is, think of someone who tries to harm a child. That's a scandal. Better that a millstone be tied around that person's neck and them thrown into the sea than you ever harm a child. Or the fact that so much of our social discourse has been poisoned, and we say all these dehumanizing things about the unborn, about immigrants, about prisoners, about any of God's little ones. That's a scandal. The fact that we live in the richest nation on earth by far that's ever existed, and yet 14 million children go to bed hungry every night in this country, not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. That's a scandal. And Pope Francis says, we should be scandalized by things like that. He once said very beautifully, if something should rightly scandalize us, should disturb our consciences, it is the fact that many of our brothers and sisters are living without the strength, light, and consolation born of friendship with Jesus Christ, without a community of faith to support them, without meaning and a goal in life. More than by fear of going astray, my hope is that we be moved by a fear of remaining shut up within structures that give us a false sense of security, while meanwhile people are at our door who are hungry. And Jesus does not tire of saying to us, give them something to eat. That can be the spiritual food of the gospel, but it can just be physical food as well. We need to feed the hungry. Scandal is always going to do one of two things for people. The word scandal comes from the Greek word scandalon, which means a stumbling stone, something that trips you up. And scandal is either going to trip people up in their faith. It's going to get people discouraged or maybe tempt them to give up. Or scandal is going to inspire them to say, there are these big problems in the world that somebody needs to tackle. And I'm going to roll up my sleeves and humbly and joyfully accept Jesus' invitation to do something about it. And I'm very pleased that people continue to do that in our church and our world today, despite all the difficulties that are in our world. I think of something as simple as the Newmarket Community Food Pantry here in town. And people of all religions, all churches get together and they feed the hungry in our community. They don't ask, what religion are you before we feed you? No, anyone can come who's in need. The other day, Pastor Patty down at the community church was saying to me, I feel bad, Father Matt, because St. Mary's does such a wonderful job supporting our food pantry every year with the annual appeal, and so many of our volunteers come from St. Mary's, and we get so much of our food from the New Hampshire Food Bank, which is run by New Hampshire Catholic Charities, and we tend to get the credit because the food pantry is down at our church. And I said, well, thank you for saying that, but I don't really care who gets the credit. I don't really care if the feeding of the hungry is happening inside or outside my camp. I care that it's happening, that the hungry are being fed. We feed the hungry and the poor because we love the hungry and the poor. And we love the hungry and the poor because we love Jesus. And so I'd like to invite George Willant to come up and tell us a little bit more about how we can help the food bank, the food pantry this year.